because we are all Pollyannas. Our presence here today is a signal of the optimism and hope that we as a community, a constituency, and a country can do better. We are here at this workshop to let the light shine, to be the hope, and to be a beacon that the nation consistently cries out for. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event is a culmination of planning that started right after the passing of Tropical Storm Brett. While the combined efforts of the MP's office, the regional corporation, the office of the chairman, and all the agents of various ministries did work together to respond in the aftermath, several gaping holes were identified. In March of 2016, I attended an IELP program, which is the U.S. Embassy's program called International Leadership Visitor Program. And one of the legs, I visited the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, MEMA. And we spent about half day at that institution, and I was able to discuss in some detail with them their strategies and processes in dealing with disaster preparedness, management, aftermath as well. So after Brett, I realized that we were so far away from having a world-class response that something had to be done. Now, too many times in this country when we demand world-class in anything, they laugh at us. Why do we demand world-class? Is it within our reach? And I believe in aiming for world-class. So if we fall short, we don't fall short far away from it. So it is my hope that sometime between now and the end of my first term in office, which may be sometime within the next 30 months, we can land a position in this constituency where we can have a world-class response to disasters in this constituency. So based on that, I reached out to my friends at the U.S. Embassy to say, hey, we need some help. You have some experience. What can we do to bring that experience to us? And then how do we build on it? So over the past few months, while my office and the embassy were engaged in several conversations about moving forward, Mayaro fell victim to two successive flooding events within 3 months of each other. I refer to those two events as the Great Flood of Diwali 2017, which many of you from the Rio Claro Mayaro Regional Corporation were up to your chest and neck in water, and obviously the New Year's flood that stretched from Old Year's into New Year's. Again, what was evident in those two events is that while my office and Chairman Ram's office, with all our local response teams, were heavily engaged, we really put up a great fight. There were several weaknesses identified as well. So while I hesitate to say that these three events in 2017 was no big thing, the last man to utter those words is out of a job right now from the ODPM. But we must thank God that we did not record the loss of one life or limb in any of these events. Material losses can always be repaired and replaced. Life is sacrosanct. Now when we compare ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago with our Caribbean neighbors and what they have had to deal with, we can always thank God that we are located 10 degrees north latitude. This line of latitude have always spared us from the full brunt of hurricanes and other menacing weather patterns. I would normally tell people that our greatest gift is being positioned 10 degrees north. It is also the reason why Trinidad and Tobago sometimes we get left behind. Since the Red House fire in 1903, we have not recorded a major catastrophe in our Twin Island Republic, which has necessitated an overall rerouting and engineering of our infrastructure and technology. Nothing has had to be redone in any massive way in this country in the last 50 years or so. So look at Grenada, look at Jamaica, look at Barbados. When we visit as tourists, we are always amazed at the quality of their tourism product. And the reason for that is that those territories are locked into a cycle of destruction and rejuvenation. So every time they rebuild better. And that is a challenge for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, because as we all know, God is a tree. Not only have our infrastructure become antiquated because of that, I believe that our thinking as a people, as a nation, have also suffered the same malady, because we have not had to deal with major catastrophic disasters in this country. So in some ways we are stuck in our own way, and we try to make it work. And more so when we as leaders, and many of us who are first responders, try to execute modern programs because we spend thousands of training, we bring Dr. Roman and his team here and we talk about modern ways of doing things. We have to deal with the citizenry who remain laid back and unprepared. More often than not, our citizens are unwilling to change. So that is a challenge for us to build disaster management. If you allow me, this is one story about an episode in the wild flood. Man came to my office and he said, well, PARAY, the flood thing I seen on all years, nobody brings nothing for me. So I asked him quite gently if he was familiar with the story of Noah. And the story of Noah, God told Noah that he raised a son. And what did Noah do? Noah went and killed an animal. Because he doesn't sit back and wait for somebody to do something for him. He took action. So I'm not telling us to do that we need to watch the arm the rain going to fall. But what is our arm? Our action is, what is our plan? What is our disaster plan? What do we need to put in our home? Food, water, and education. If I'm living in a low-lying area, where do I move to? Which relatives can I move to? Can I find out where the shelters are? What do I need to secure in my home? If I can leave to the best shelter. But too often we see in this country that also the rules are made back, because I believe over the years, we as politicians, and Glenn may agree or choose to disagree with me on this one, sometimes people expect us to run in 5 minutes after and we throw resources. So we have gotten the citizenry very comfortable, and it makes good politics as well. But are we training our citizens to help themselves? And I think that's a malaise that we need to fix at some point in time going forward. But I want to tell you that that sacred line of latitude at 10 degrees north cannot save us from every single disaster. We have to deal with the threats of earthquakes, tsunamis. We have a robust energy sector in my area here. Oil spills are a real issue for us. Sabotage, aging infrastructure, just to name a few. Many of you would have seen or read on the news about the collapsing bridge in Florida at FIT. And only this morning I saw in the news where there is a report that one of the structural engineers sent a note and said, look guys, I'm seeing a crack along this bridge somewhere. And the system did not pick it up fast enough to save the 15 or 20 lives that were lost at the collapse. So how do we learn from these lessons as agencies, as responders, as people who have the responsibility? Ministry of Works have responsibility for roads or bridges and so on. What is the procedure? How do we strengthen those things in the constituency to make sure that we don't fall prey to some of those events? Pushing even further, we live in an age of radicalism and terrorism. We have assets in this constituency: oil, energy, natural gas. We have pipelines. These are real risks for us. And as we go forward into a world that is much more challenging, disasters that are man-made in terms of these areas are real. So how do we, as a community, as a country, plan to minimize these risks? So after months of planning, we are here today. And again, and I'm using President Weeks because I know a lot of you would have listened to her delivery yesterday, because she was so on point in her delivery. She also said that people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. So nobody is here today to give any one of you instructions. We are here today to talk, to share experience, and I am sure as professionals in your own field, many of you are here and you will hear things that you may already know. As President Weeks said, it is better that people be reminded than be instructed. So, while much of this discussion may not be new, I am satisfied that you will be reminded of all the roles, your roles, my roles, and responsibilities going forward. So what are the aims and objectives of the program today? Now, this is day one out of a 3-day visit to the constituency by the team from Delaware. And I would like to give a bit of my hope about what we can accomplish over the next 3 days. Our guest from the Delaware National Guard is here to share their experience with us in the field of disaster management and response. They are not here to force their way on us, but to share the mistakes that they would have made over the years, so we don't have to make the very same ones. You, as our local leaders, you are here to share your experience. Your experience and expertise will speak to our culture, our attitude, our predisposition, and of course our behaviors. We are all professionals in our respective fields, and I urge all of you to have two-way discussions today. Speak amongst your table, speak across your table, and obviously engage Colonel Roman and his team. Let us ensure that they work very, very hard for the next 3 days while they are here in the constituency. And lastly, use the opportunity to network with everyone in the room today. Share your contact, because everyone sitting in this room, the next natural disaster to affect this constituency, somebody is going to be reaching out to one of you. So when we can get so many agents and agencies under one roof, and I know Chairman Ram tells me the challenge it is to get agencies to sit together for 1 hour, much less to ask them to come here to spend a couple hours with them. So before you leave today, please, during the breakout sessions, while you're having your tea, coffee, introduce yourself. We have fire officers, we have police officers, we have people from works, health, please introduce yourself, share contact number. And the guys from Delaware here, the experience stretches far and wide. I understand we do have one of our guys here who has military experience, policing, crime and narcotics and so on. And I understand we'll be engaging the Rio Claro police at some point in time tomorrow as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, the ultimate outcome of today's event is to find a model for us going forward that is culturally sound, because we have our nuances as a people, strategically solid, because while we may not find a fix today, and this is not the last time that we are going to meet with this team is going to be working with us over the next few months, together with the Office of the Chairman, together with the officials from various ministries, we're going to continue the conversation until we put a solid plan in place. And then this plan must be surgically precise for the next disaster that befalls this constituency. So it's all about building our resiliency for disaster response. And resiliency is the key word here. It's something that when we set it must be part of our mindset, and we must be able to activate this behavior by rote. It's not something that we should have to open a manual and flip to page 125. What do we do now? It is something that we will have to grow accustomed to at the end of the day. Before I wrap up my little introduction, I want to say a special thank you to Chairman Ram for warmly embracing the idea when I approached his office with this program. His unwavering support and that of the council must be acknowledged. So please, let's show our gratitude to the Mineral Resources Corporation. So I ask each and every one of you to stay the course of the day, participate in the conversation, and let us all do our part in strengthening our community one family at a time. So as I close, just as I started, I'm going to borrow from my Excellency Paul Mewitt once again. And I quote, "As I see it, we have but two choices. Option one, we can lament, blame, criticize, and allow miasma of despair to overwhelm us, or two, we can consciously and intentionally choose the alternative. Not wish for, or dream about, or only hope and pray for the alternative, but make up a hard mind and mobilize forces and resources to step out boldly and make Trinidad and Tobago a better place for us and our children. All the while understanding that though faith is a necessity, it is useless without action." Let us take action today, ladies and gentlemen, and let's have a productive day.
Thank you very much indeed, Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. RUSHTON PARAY. Mr. Parrays spoke of one most important area, and that is when we, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have developed a particular culture. And I've seen this culture, and people without a culture is nobody. But when we start creating cultures that relates to dependency, is when we find ourselves in deep difficulty. And that is the culture when, in terms of disaster, when floods, rains, and so will fall on us, the first thing comes to mind: mattress, hamper. Mattress, hamper. And bottled water. Alright, bottled water is fine, but we have to start educating people. And today what we have in our audience is what we call a group of people who are credible messengers. And therefore your responsibility is to go back to your communities, to go back. It is not dependent on the local government representative alone or the MPs. Every single one of us has to play our role in educating, informing, directing, reaching out to our communities, a part of our NGOs, in terms of our organizations, our sporting organizations, our cultural organizations, our churches, mosques, temples, is where we must deliver the messages to resonate in the minds of our people. It is about time we present to you the next speaker, a very young and dynamic individual, a young mind with great vision. Ladies and gentlemen, he, as indicated by MP Parray, has welcomed the initiative and so communicated with all members of council and those at the regional corporation. And today we have a mass presence of representatives from the regional corporation under his watch. Put your hands together as we welcome Chairman Glenn Ram.
Thank you very much, Neil. The Honorable RUSHTON PARAY, Member of Parliament for Mayaro, the Honorable Christina Hussain, Member of Parliament for Kumoto Manzalina, Vice Chairman and members of Council of the Regional Corporation, members from the Delaware National Guard, my good friends from the Civil Affairs Department of the U.S. Embassy, members of staff of the Mayaro Regional Corporation, all invited guests here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. As Chairman of the Mayaro Regional Corporation, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome the officials from the Delaware National Guard to the region of Mayaro. It is the hope, in fact it's my hope, and that is the root of the growth and development of the Delaware National Guard and the Mayaro region. I am happy that this region is so fortunate to have captured the attention of this organization to assist our communities. The Mayaro Regional Corporation is located in southeast Trinidad with a population of approximately 35,000 citizens spread over 3 administrative districts, Pool, Mayaro, and Beach Rio Caro. The region possesses an abundance of beachfront and the largest reservoir of natural gas and crude oil along the eastern coast. We have a healthy fishing and agriculture industry in our rural villages and communities. Our people are of a diverse background, very humble and down to earth. However, we face an ongoing and overbearing fate during the wet season, which is July to December. Over the past recent months, our region was devastated by the torrential rains, causing our people and our communities much havoc. Homes were flooded, some even destroyed. Agricultural produce were washed away, electricity disruption for days, and villages were cut off as roads became impassable. Storm Brett, which emanated from right here in the Atlantic Ocean, lashed us first in the southeast coast, with Mayaro receiving the first impact of the storm. Later followed widespread flooding across the region, which battered the already damaged communities and villages. What a disaster it was. Thank God for our disaster management team, our technical officers, the MP's office, our police officers, fire officers, coast guards, and all other volunteers from the MRC-RC who donated their time and effort to help those in distress. Storm Brett wreaked havoc in the Mayaro region, resulting in numerous landslips, blown off roofs, uprooted trees, homes flooded, out along with collapsed homes. The MRC-RC team worked in ensuring firstly that all human lives were intact. The ultimate aim was to mitigate the effects of the natural disasters, which is a crucial part of our corporation overall management disaster plan. The disaster management cycle illustrates the ongoing process by which our corporation plans for and reduces the impact of disasters, respond during and immediately following a disaster. The cycle entails 1. Mitigation, minimizing the effects of disaster. 2. Preparedness, planning how to respond. And 3. Respond, efforts to minimize the hazards created by a disaster. And recovery, returning the community to normalcy. Although the disaster management unit and first responders unit had the action plan implanted, there were some downfalls, such as trained staff members were marooned, therefore the lack of staffing became a hindrance in dealing effectively with persons affected with the floods. 2. there were limited relief supplies available to the disaster management unit for assisting affected flood victims. And 3, there was a lack of communication between agencies involved in assisting affected persons, and so it may have given rise to double assessment of flood victims. However, the MRC-RC was still able to gather with myself and my team to put together a good relief effort, which the citizens were very appreciative of. Both Delaware and Trinidad and Tobago have something in common. We both face a lot of heavy rainfalls, which results in flooding on a recurrent basis. We at the PARAY Regional Corporation is always willing to partner and join hands for the greater benefit of our people. We take great pride in serving the citizens of this country and the citizens of our region. The MRC-RC is open to new opportunities and look forward in collaborating with the Delaware National Guard to enhance our training program, action plans, and practices. I am sure that the influences, ideas, as brought up by this outstanding organization will definitely benefit us, the people of the region of PARAY. Once again, I thank you, each one of you, for coming all the way from Delaware to share your expertise. I am so grateful. As chairman of the PARAY Regional Corporation, I look forward to continued partnership with this venture. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman Ram. Give Chairman Ram a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. So we are ready for the workshop classroom style. So, having said that, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Member of Parliament, the Chairman, the Regional Corporation, the people and constituents of PARAY, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we want to take this opportunity to warmly, graciously welcome the Delaware National Guard team headed by Colonel Bogman, who will now take the stage and continue with this part of the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Colonel a thunderous round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Honorable Member of Parliament PARAY, Honorable Member of Parliament Anwar Hussain, Chairman Ram, Mr. Ramdet and the staff, community leaders and elected officials, members of the first responder community and disaster response community, industry partners and community partners, as well as the resort staff. Thank you so very, very much for having us and hosting us here in Mayaro. I'd like to see all other protocols observed, because for my next trick, I asked you all of your names because I was going to show you a feat of mental resiliency, but I think after table 3 I kind of ran out of steam. But the real underlying reason is to identify that there is a wide array of personnel here that are involved with disaster response and community leadership, and you're invested in the health and wellness of your community. So by identifying who's who in the room, please, as the Honorable Member of Parliament mentioned, please take some time on the breaks at your leisure to get to know one another if you don't. I'll talk about some similarities between Delaware and Trinidad and Tobago here in a moment, but one of the things I want to mention is that Delaware, though bordered on 3 sides by land, is an island, much like Trinidad and Tobago. There are 3 counties, you'll hear a little more about that. But if something happens in the southern part of the state, everybody in the northern part of the state knows what happens in the southern part of the state. So you have some similarities, I think, between Delaware and Trinidad and Tobago. And probably most of you know one another here, but if you don't, please, we can't stress enough, take some time to get to know one another and see where you fit in the overall disaster response activity. So why Delaware? Why the National Guard? Does anyone know where New Orleans is? Or Barbuda? Or Dominica? What happened in those places? Nothing good happened there during the storm seasons. There were issues with preparedness, there were issues with response. And so that brings me to why Delaware and why the Delaware National Guard. I'll introduce my team here in a moment. But every state has a National Guard, much like the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force Reserves. The idea is that we're called out to assist in the first response in case of state emergency. New Orleans is in Louisiana. They have a National Guard. They were overwhelmed. That disaster response community was overwhelmed. The National Guard from around the country came in and helped there. Similarly, Trinidad and Tobago has a robust disaster response capability, and you export it pretty routinely for your neighbors in the region. So I want to highlight again that there are some similarities between how the National Guard works and how disaster response in Trinidad and Tobago works, in that everybody gets together in case of emergency and moves out to respond together to solve the problems. So the last thing I want to say is, based on conversations today, the content that we go over, that's going to generate questions from the group. So as Honorable Member of Parliament PARAY mentioned, there are some common goals and concepts and outcomes. Disaster response is everybody's responsibility in this room, in addition to the members of the populace. So what I want to say up front is that all of us here, I think, are in public service, right? And so as a matter of course, if you are in public service, you have a responsibility to public trust, and you have a responsibility to coordinate for the good of the public safety. The people in this room are going to generate relationships with one another, chains of command and lines of authority. And I will tell you, as in the case of New Orleans or Barbuda or Dominica, where the devastation is so widespread, sometimes and again, I think you've seen it here, the lines of communication will break, the resourcing will break, and sometimes you have to rely on some of those personal relationships that you forge in a place like this. Plans and communications. Chairman Ramdas provided us a copy of the Regional Corporation's response plan. That stuff needs to be continuously updated and practiced and shared and integrated and nested. It's a constant gardening effort to go ahead and make those things kind of work. And the last thing I'll say on this chart is that practice makes permanent. My wife has always given me a hard time that practice makes permanent. I have a lot of bad habits. I like spicy food. I like coming to Trinidad and Tobago to eat spicy food, and I have to watch my weight. But if we practice fitness, if we practice resiliency, if we practice amidst ourselves in terms of disaster response activities, we know where the fire extinguishers are, we know where the exits are, we know where the resources are stockpiled, we know how to tell a public message for people to go to get to safety. We have to practice our ideals, and we have to practice our plans. So those are some of the things that we hope to talk about as we move through the course of the day and into tomorrow. Again, I can't stress enough how glad and honored we are to be here in this part of Trinidad and Tobago to meet with new members of the community. I'll talk a little bit more in a following presentation, but Delaware has had a relationship with Trinidad and Tobago for going on 14 years, primarily with Defense Force and at the federal level on the Ministry of National Security to do engagement with the military. A lot of engagement in terms of security cooperation, which means we do educational sessions back and forth, and it's been quite extraordinary. We've worked with ODPM in the past, National Operations Center, and so it's just a real joy to be part of another part of the community and expand our awareness and expand our exposure to the common good of humanitarian assistance and disaster response. So with that, I would like to close by saying, again, we're just super glad to be here. It's going to be a quick 2 days. Anything that we can share with you, we are more than happy to do so. Anything that you feel is important to share with us, we're happy to receive it and work it into our plan, because, as I said, it's a constant and continuous effort to do disaster response, and it's all hands on deck. So thank you very much for that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here. I'm Avery Dalton. I work for the Delaware Emergency Management Agency. I'm an emergency planner there, work with technical hazards, radiological, and hazmat materials. Next slide. As you can see from the slide, Delaware is about 3,500 kilometers north of here, Trinidad and Tobago. And right now we're getting ready for some inclement weather. We have six inches of snow that's going to arrive tomorrow. So slightly different problem set than you have here. Next slide. So a little bit about Delaware. Delaware was originally settled with the Native American tribes, the Lenni, Lenape, and the Nanticoke Indian tribes to the south. We were initially colonized by Dutch traders and in the Lewis area of Delaware and lower Delaware. And we were one of the original 13 colonies. We're right in the mid-Atlantic region. And we were the first state to ratify the Constitution. So we have about 950,000 people in Delaware, just under 1 million. Most of that population is located in northern Delaware, in the northernmost county, Newcastle. Approximately 65% of the population is there. The other two counties are more rural, more farming to the south, less populous. Our number one industry in the state is government, number one employer. We do have an oil refinery, and we do have a nuclear power plant on the New Jersey side of the Delaware Bay. Chemical industry was more important to the state years ago. That's been in decline. We're producing less chemicals in the state. Banking is important. We incorporate a lot. There are a lot of corporations that incorporate in the state of Delaware due to the cost. And farming is important. We grow a lot of corn and soybeans, and we also have a lot of chicken farms in the lower part of Delaware. Next slide. So our three counties are, again, Newcastle County, the Yellow County to the north. The city of Wilmington is there. I want to point out real quick that we have 5 emergency operations centers for the state of Delaware. There's one in each county. Kent County and Sussex County also have one. And then there's also one in the city of Wilmington. And then we have our statewide emergency operations center, which I'm going to go into more into the next presentation that I have later. Delaware's about 154 kilometers long, and it ranges in width from 14 kilometers to 56 kilometers. And it's the second smallest state behind Rhode Island. And it's located on the Delmarva Peninsula. This slide doesn't show it, but I'll show that to you in a later slide here. Next slide. So one of the things I want to point out about Delaware is a lot of the hurricanes that come up from the south, they come up, and this piece of land right here at Cape Hatteras tends to push those storms out to the sea. So we don't really have a lot of hurricanes that are impacting the Delmarva Peninsula right here, up here where we are. So it pretty much has to come up and then make a turn back to impact Delaware. But we do have another type of storm called a northeaster, and it pushes water up into the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay area, and it pushes water up and causes us flooding. So we do have a lot of flooding problems as well. We have a lot of coastal areas. Delaware is shown right here, and most of the lower part of the state in blue here is coastal plain. It's probably 10 to 20 meters in elevation. A lot of the area along the coast is tidal marshes, tidal river systems. Up here in the northern part is a Piedmont area, and I have some slides showing that. It goes up to a couple hundred meters, about 100 or 200 meters. Next slide. This is typical of our coastline for Delaware. You can see we have a lot of tidal marshes in the area. Very few beachfront communities, though, from here up to about here, and then it is more populous in Newcastle County. We do have our resort areas down here, and I've got another slide that shows that. But we do have flooding events, mostly in Newcastle County is impacted a lot when we do have flooding. The Delaware Bay is there, and also the Atlantic Ocean is to the south. Next slide. And these are our resort communities that I mentioned, and they're on the straight portion to the southern part of the state. And we do have impacts from storms there, mostly erosion of the sand and the beachfront. Sometimes impacts there. You can see here that we've got some. They took out the boardwalk. Well, the boardwalk's still there, but they took out the elevated boardwalk and they put in these beach dunes to help with erosion events. Next slide. And these are the Piedmont areas that I mentioned to the northern part of the state. Very narrow sliver of land that is rolling topography, very hilly, and it's a little bit higher than the coastal plain portion of the rest of the state to the south. Next slide. That's all I have on our topography and basic information for the state. I've got another presentation that's coming up here in another, I think there's one more ahead of me. Thank you.
All right, so this is the last of the really kind of education orientation briefing as to who we are and what we do. So we're the Delaware National Guard, and as I said, I neglected to say a couple things. On behalf of the Governor of the great state of Delaware, John Carney, and our Adjutant General, Major General Carol Timmons, we are in fact pleased to be here, and they are great supporters of the program that we share between Trinidad and Tobago and the state of Delaware. So here pictured is our boss, our two bosses, our military boss and our Commander-in-Chief at the chain of command. Here's kind of our organizational chart. At the top is Major General Timmons. She, like Trinidad and Tobago, she's the first female in the leadership role for the Delaware National Guard. And again, congratulations on the election of Her Excellency Paula May Weeks. That is quite a progressive step here in the great country of Trinidad and Tobago. We have an Air Boss, an Army Boss, and we have senior enlisted advisors that help to engage in enlisted issues. We have two missions in the National Guard. I mentioned something called the Citizen Airman or the Citizen Soldier in my initial remarks. The National Guard responds to state activity, state emergencies. That's our primary role and function, is to be just like everyone in this room and respond in time to the state's need. But when the nation calls, outside of our state response, when the nation calls, when the President and Congress calls us to move, we move to support the federal mission. Or in some cases other states' missions, as in the case of New Orleans I mentioned earlier. Here's kind of a picture of how it works. In times of great trouble, the President calls us, but by and large we belong to the Governor of the great state of Delaware. Another depiction of that, and you have a couple of activities on the left and right side of the charts as to what our areas of specialization are across the board. You see we have ranging from aviation to law enforcement, aircraft and vehicle maintenance, movement of people and things. We have a band, not as great as the Steel Pan Band coming out of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force Reserves, but they are the best band in the land according to the Adjutant General in Delaware. So we also have something called the Regional Training Institute on the Army Guard side. That is where we bring soldiers and airmen from around the country to train on certain activities, primarily in the field of communications and signal. On the air side, we have tactical airlift. We were privileged to participate in the Trade Wind 17 activity last year, the multinational exercise sponsored by Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. We were able to provide one of our C-130s during that exercise to move multinational troops back and forth between Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, the first activity of its kind for Delaware National Guard in Trinidad and Tobago. We also have cyber activities and training available through our airmen and soldiers in the Network Warfare Unit, air medical evacuation, so nurses and doctors that move people by air. Again, a critical feature for both combat operations and state and federal emergency. So cops, engineers, maintainers, just like on the Army side. We get involved in our community. As I said, we have people who are on the full-time staff, and then we have folks that have regular jobs and then do their military duty. So we work very closely with our community partners, and I see we have community partners from tourism, we have community partners from forestry, we have folks from industry, so it's nice, again, to see that we share those blended capabilities. You can see pictured here, there's a Delaware C-130 with a Trinidad and Tobago flag popping out of the top of it. That was in 2016. We had a really good activity working with the whole of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, moving around and doing some activities on field medicine, law enforcement, and public affairs, and an engineering project in Blanchard's. So, which, if it turns out, was a school coupled with a disaster relief area. So we have had the opportunity to engage the disaster response community here on construction projects that contribute to the wellness and readiness of communities in Trinidad and Tobago. And here you see us with our community partners. Now, specific, why am I standing in front of this room? State Partnership Program is my privilege to be the director of. As I said, we've been with Trinidad and Tobago for 14 years, working across the board, working in these various areas. We've been part of energy sector initiative work, environmental security, looking at critical infrastructure protection. Some of the things Honorable PARAY made mention of earlier, protection of critical infrastructure. Professionalization and sustainment of the force. There are some things that are done quite beautifully in the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force that we have learned from, and similarly we have been able to share some of our practices and procedures with them for our mutual benefit. Support to institutional programs. We've seen things like military justice get stood up in Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. It's a very exciting program. Airmen and family readiness, things that contribute to the relief and wellness of soldiers, airmen, and sailors that we were able to participate in the establishment of. Strategic messaging and brand management. So something we talked about here a little while ago at the opening remarks is spreading the message of resiliency and what our various offices can provide to the community and for one another. So we worked on strategic messaging. How do we get our name out there so the community knows? You know, if I say who you're going to call, does Ghostbusters? That's in people's memory. Who you're going to call Ghostbusters? It's kind of a call and response, like in church or at the auction. There's if you say who you're going to call Ghostbusters, that brand sticks in from the 1980s. So it's been said over and over, it sticks. So the strategic messaging and brand management is very important to what we do as people who are in public service. And we've worked on some counter-narcotics and trafficking, which an unfortunate similarity between Delaware and Trinidad and Tobago is a high incidence of crime and narcotics. So we've seen and been able to share ideas on how to combat those activities that impact your nation and our state in a mutually beneficial way. And that will continue, I think, going on into the future. But it's something we continue to monitor and work alongside. But you see a depiction of over a couple of years of events. We actually have, in this photo I want to point out, this young man in the Delaware State Police uniform is a native-born Trinidadian. We have a photograph from Blanchishez when we did the engineering project. A bunch of folks from the Air Guard, the 50th celebration of independence we were here for. And you have General Timmons and our former adjutant general, General Babala, there with some folks. I'm not sure, I think it might be Coast Guard personnel there in that photograph. But we've been here for a while. We love visiting, we love being part of the partnership. We think it's mutually beneficial, and any chance we have to engage, we really enjoy it. So we're all over the place, as I mentioned, Trade Wind 17. And the bottom line is we brand ourselves as being always ready and always there. People know that they can rely on us to supplement and assist during times of need. We help to replace some of the activities that law enforcement can provide. We provide tactical lift, get people to the hospitals. So just a really broad base of things that we're able to do for disaster response. And that is specific. We integrate, it's specific to the National Guard mindset, but we do integrate up to DEMA and to FEMA. So like ODPM and SEDEMA relationships, we have those relationships and responsibilities and liaison ties to those folks as well. So that's just a quick overview on the Delaware National Guard, and that's really the last of the orientation education briefings as to why kind of we're standing here in the front of the room. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Avery Dalton from DEMA now, who he will now speak to DEMA specifically and the range of activity that DEMA is responsible for. And I think that's really germane to the broader view of public service and how they are the hub and that spoke model of doing command and control, communications and planning and coordination for the collective resources that you would find in a room like this one. And if there are questions along the way, please write them down, shout them out. We can do calisthenics to make sure that we're staying awake if you like. But what I don't want to have happen is you hear me drone on. I only have like 2 or 3 jokes. They're not that funny. I repeat them a lot. My wife is sick of hearing them. So, you know, please feel free to raise your hand, call out, stop us at any time along the course of the briefings so that we can try to address some of the real meat and potatoes issues that we are all faced with.
Well, good morning again. Thank you. I'm going to expand a little bit on the emergency management agency that I work for, DEMA. And a few minutes ago I mentioned that we had 5 emergency operations center in the state of Delaware. I'm going to show you a little bit more about our statewide emergency operations center and the Delaware Emergency Management Agency. Here's the slide showing what I'm going to cover. I'll go over our mission. We're part of Department of Safety and Homeland Security for the state, and go through our history, our purpose, our Emergency Operations Center. I'll expand a little bit and show you some information on the Emergency Operations Center, our organization and the sections and how the sections are laid out, and that should conclude it. Next slide. So our mission, it's kind of long-winded here, but I want to highlight a few things. Our Delaware Emergency Management Agency, so we're covering the tenets of emergency management. Preparedness, having a plan. What are you going to do? You exercise the plan. You find flaws in the plan, you do an after-action report, and you update it. Response. Respond to the incident. You have an incident, you do your response. Recovery, the actions you take after the incident has occurred to get things back to normal. You open up shelters for the community. You restore the power, you clear the roads, clear the debris. Mitigation, those things in which you would hope to do before the incident occurs, but a lot of times they occur, mitigation efforts occur afterwards. That bridge that's too low, maybe you raise it, maybe you do some work on the roads, build more dikes, water control structures, those types of things. So you want to restore the economy back, you want to get things back to normal as quickly as possible to help people and help the economy. We're a division within the Department of Safety and Homeland Security, as I mentioned, and we're covered under Delaware State Code. Next slide. So here's the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. We're in with the Delaware State Police, the Division of Communications, and the Capitol Police. Those are the police for our state agencies and our state offices. Next slide. So during World War II, the Department of Defense set up, because Delaware is right on the ocean, we had a lot of, there was concern over submarines in Germany. So the Department of Defense set up civil defense preparedness offices, and they put one in Delaware as well. We're originally located in a bunker along coastal defense bunker. Next slide. So our purpose of DEMA, we coordinate the state management of the state's domestic emergency incidents, provide a core plan for prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation of incidents. That's the Delaware Emergency Operations Plan. Next slide. Protect citizens of Delaware from terrorist attacks, natural hazard, and we address those core areas in our plan. Protect life and health and safety, and reduce disruptions to the way of our life. So we're going to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. Next slide. Provide coordination and resource management, assistance and liaison between towns, cities, and state agencies. As I mentioned before, we have the 5 Delaware Emergency Operations Centers. So we're the overarching operations center for the state. So if we have a local event in one of the counties, that county emergency operations center will be managing that event for that county and that local area. They will reach up to us if they need resources that are state resources. In other words, if they need National Guard resources, if they need Delaware State Troopers or Delaware State Police to respond to an incident, they'll reach out to us for assistance. So that's kind of the way that the process works for us. And we effect liaison and cooperation with other states and the federal government. I mentioned earlier we have a nuclear power plant, so we may reach out to federal officials for information on the nuclear power plant, and we have to coordinate with other states. It's not just Delaware, so we affect that. Next slide. Here's our Emergency Operations Center. It was constructed about 20 years ago, 40,000 square feet. We've got emergency generators, enough power or enough fuel for about 6 days, 7 days of operation. Water storage as well. Next slide. Here's the floor of our Emergency Operations Center, the main floor. You can see the photo to the right. We have screens for everybody, so we're going to have people from the National Guard, the fire service, public health, if we have a major event there. So we can communicate directly with them. Those are our emergency support coordinators. No, go back. The photo to the left shows the governor's conference room. The governor can actually sit up there if there's a major emergency. He comes in and he can supervise, help supervise the event as well. And again, it's another view of our emergency service coordinator spots. Next slide. And here's our partner, our co-located partner agencies. We have the Delaware Department of Transit Traffic Management System, or Traffic Management Center there. And they have statewide coverage, and they can control traffic for the state. So they can close roads and put up signage and notify the public of events as they're going on. Next slide. So our emergency service coordinators, as I mentioned, we work with the National Guard. They respond to incidents for us. We may need technical specialization. For example, we have the nuclear power plant across the river. We have public health incidents. If we need a public health, a specialization in influenza or other diseases, if we have a disease outbreak, we would call in their specialists to help us make decisions to open support centers or immunization centers if that was required. And our partner agencies, I've covered that, but we work with other government agencies and private industry. If we have power outages, we're going to be working with Delmarva Power, that's our local power provider, and we have another one, Delaware Electrical Co-op. Next slide. And here's a slide showing, busy slide showing all of our partner agencies. We have some federal partner agencies, the Coast Guard, National Weather Service, and local electrical power providers and other state agencies. Next slide. So here's our organization layout. So we have a director, and then we have our public information officer under the director, and he's going to be working directly for the director of FEMA, issuing press releases and drafting emergency notifications to the public. The deputy director, he manages the sections off to the left here, operations, logistics, finance. We have training and exercises, and then we have a program called Citizens Corps. I'll elaborate on that a little bit. Our principal planner on the right side of the graphic shows our 3 technical planning sections, and I work under technical hazards. We work with hazmat, and we work with radiological incidents there, terrorism and preparedness hazards, and natural hazards. Next slide. More about our sections. Planning sections, I just covered that. Next slide. Key activities. Okay, this is our Delaware Emergency Operations Plan. That was the plan that you asked me about, and that's a strategic plan, and it covers everything in the state. Incidents from riots, civil disturbance, to radiological, to chemical hazmat, to flooding, earthquakes, and so on. Our pre-disaster mitigation projects are covered under this section, and public assistance projects and training and damage assessment. They also cover like our debris management plan, what happens after a storm. Yes, sir.
Can you give an example of what would be your pre-disaster hazard mitigation project? What would encompass that particular pre-disaster? What would you look at?
I actually have a slide that covers that, and it's got some photos. So 1 or 2 more slides up. Next slide. Actually, here it is right here. So, well, here's part of it. So after we have a storm or a storm event, we're going to have damage, and we're going to go back and look at that. Maybe that road needs to be upgraded, or the next slide shows a mitigation project. Actually, go to the next slide. So here's a home. Here's a mitigation project just for a homeowner, raising the elevation of this house for flood control. But we also would do that for roads, for bridges, for diking, around water control structures, and so on. So looking at those things, pre-disaster. And there's 2 pathways. There's one for infrastructure projects, and then there's one for homeowner projects, like this one here on the slide. So it's kind of 2 different funding pathways, and it has certain regulatory requirements that it has to go through. It would need a study, it would need a past history of problems identified, and and then it would need to meet certain criteria financially in order to do that. There would have to be, an assessment of the cost of doing it, and that would have to be validated through a process. We have to have a disaster declaration from the governor at a starting point. And then we have to meet a set criteria financially of how much damage has occurred in each county. And there's a financial number there that it has to exceed, the amount of damage in that county has to exceed. And then you have to have, statewide, you have to have a number, again, that damage has to exceed. And then you have to get that federal declaration. In order to meet that federal declaration, the state has to meet a certain number in the amount of dollars in damage.
I think the general answer to what a disaster is, it's going to be based on your situation here. You know your communities, you know your folks, you know what's going to impact life and impact business and impact people's day-to-day operations. So disaster for you may be something than what we consider a disaster. The main thing you're going to look for is if it's going to affect life. If someone's in danger of being harmed, if someone's going to lose their life, or if it impacts medical services getting through or your roadways, you folks are going to determine what is considered a disaster in your area. And as far as it goes with preparation, I understand that there's probably already towns and houses built in these low-lying areas. And the funds might not be there to do a project such as this where you're going to raise the house. In those cases, I feel like it's best education. You need to educate your people, tell them beforehand. We've recognized your area is susceptible to flooding and it occurs there frequently. So since we can't raise your house up to a substantial elevation, here are the steps that you need to take to be prepared. Building a kit, here's your evacuation routes, here's your shelters that you could go to in this instance until a more permanent solution can be resolved, until you can get funding to build a levee or drainage around their homes or whatnot. We need to educate them on the small steps that they can take beforehand to be prepared to respond to that flooding.
So what we would do in short order would be the disaster declaration from the state or federal level, the offering of shelters, so your EOC would stand up and shelters would start to stand up, so places for people to go. The offering of non-mandatory evacuation followed by mandatory evacuation, which even when you use the word mandatory in states in the U.S., people will still stay home with their property. So I've been around the world and we're all basically the same. Nobody wants to leave their stuff. You know, I take all my carry-on with me when I go to the airport. I don't like to give to the guy at the thing. So people are people. The government can't, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier, the government can't afford to provide literally to everybody all of the time. There is some measure of response, there is some measure of individual responsibility, and there's a spectrum in between. But the short answer is disaster declared, opening of facilities, offering of government-provided evacuation services, adjusting of traffic flow. I know travel in Trinidad and Tobago for traffic time, terrible. It's not a secret. But you would actually have the government shut down travel so it goes only in one direction for people to leave an area. Florida has seen this multiple times where northbound traffic is open. So those are a couple of steps. How you choose to select and implement that is amenable to Trinidad and Tobago, that is on the shoulders of all the folks in this room.
So we do have a national response framework that is federally mandated, right? And then all of the emergency management agencies from the federal government down to local government all use the same type of framework. And they do that so that everybody can communicate, so that everybody does things the same way. But what you're talking about, we accomplish on a local level by doing, so we have, I wish can you pull up his slideshow? Because he was going to hit most of these points. But So we have a working group, we'll call it, right? We'll call it it'll be the emergency preparedness working group, right? And in that, it's basically a meeting in a room like this. Not this many people because it's a lot of people. But you would basically have the head or a liaison from every important entity, right? From public health, from fire and emergency services, from police, from your energy companies, finance would be in there, your contracting people, and you put everybody in one room, right? And in one room, that's where this plan comes from. But our emergency operation plan is like 700 pages, right? Because we do it by incident, right? We have when you said before, it's not like we flip to page 155. We actually do flip to page 155, right? Because 155 would say, what does this municipality do in the event of this specific incident? And then you'll go there, and it'll say, the responsibilities of this person is this. And it's that specific, right? And you have to build to that, but it's that specific, right? And then, okay. And then when an emergency occurs, you had, say how you had 48 hours notice. So at that point, what we would do is we would activate our operations center, right? You don't need all the bells and whistles. What you need is that one person from each agency in the same room during an emergency, right? And so that's how we do it. So an emergency is going on outside, but the mayor and the fire chief and the police chief and the head of the hospital and the head of the power company or whatever, or a representative of all of those sit in one room, and all those decisions are made together, right? So that when the police chief gets a phone call that says all these roads are blocked, he can turn right to his left and look at the guy from Public Works and say, this road has a blockage. So he calls somebody and they go fix the block, right? And so that's how we coordinate everything. So we do who responds, who's in charge of roles and responsibilities, it is legislative for us, right? So what Mr. Avery was trying to say before when he was talking about amount of damage and money, what he means by, when he says that determines up to who's responsible when, is really what he's trying to say. So basically, we do what's called the capabilities assessment, right? And I'm stealing your slides, I know. But basically, like, we go out and we say, what do we have, right? So our town and what we're in charge of, how many police officers do we have? How many cases of bottled water do we have? How many dump trucks do we have? How many, and then based upon what we have, determines what we're able to do, right? And then once we reach that threshold, then the next level of government in our country takes over. That's how we operate. So our local department will do as much as possible. But once we reach our limitations, then we request it from the state. And then once the state reaches their limitations, they request it from the federal government. And that's when, like, the president will declare a disaster in an area.
I totally agree. So in the United States, we have the incident command system, and all of us here have gone through all the incident command courses, all the different levels through FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Association. And they give a guideline on how everybody falls in line and how the flow of communication works. And then back down to a local level, like Sergeant Zeno was talking about, and about your group that comes together to do that pre-planning, that's what we have. So on our installation, on our Air Force base, we have an emergency management working group. I am not an expert in how the fire department responds to things. I'm not an expert how the police respond or public works. So you need to bring together the subject matter experts from all of those departments and talk together and see how you guys can operate together. And that's what is one of the great benefits of having a group come together. It's not a lot of people, it's the subject matter experts. So you come together and everybody talks to each other and says, okay, we have flooding in this area. This is the area that normally gets flooded. What do the police normally do? What are their procedures to respond to this type of flooding? And they say, okay, we send patrolmen out to see what areas are blocked off. And then like Sergeant Zeno says, great, so now in our plan we're going to write down that the police department will find out the information of what roads are blocked, and they're going to transfer that information back to the Public Works Department. So they know what roads are blocked, so then in their response capabilities, they could outline, okay, the day after the storm ends, we are going to go clear this road first because it's a main traveled road and we need to get people in and out. So it takes members of all different departments to come together and work together to develop a plan before a disaster happens about how they're going to work together. And then once you develop that plan, it trickles down. So all the members of the police department will get that information from their head. And so all the information travels back and forth smoothly through each department. So that's what we do here. If we're doing an emergency operations plan, we assign responsibilities to organizations and individuals. Like I just said, I am not an expert on how the fire service responds or how the police department responds. But as the facilitator, the emergency manager, I'm going to take their tactics and techniques and how they do this and incorporate it into our overall plan of how we are going to respond to an incident. You're going to set forth the lines of authority. So that's what we were having that discussion about. Who is ultimately in charge? Is it going to be the mayor of the community, or are you going to push it up? Or like Sergeant Zeno said, on a small scale, you start with the community first. And once you surpass the assets that the community has, once you've run out of resources, then you need to channel it up to higher government to get help from them because you've reached the limit of what you can handle with your capabilities. You want to describe how people on the property will be protected. So in your operations plan, like I said, you're going to go back down and get down to those lower levels about how the police are going to block off this road when it's flooded because they're going to protect people from trying to go through those floodwaters where they could get trapped or injured. Or how the fire department is going to respond to if there was a fire during these floods. Or who's going to set up your shelters. All that needs to be in your plan. So when you get to that point where there's a storm approaching and you think that you're going to have some significant flooding or storm damage, you can contact that person that's in charge of your shelters and say, hey, we need to set these shelters up. It's 2 days before this possible storm may hit us. Let's go ahead and let's start preparing and get cases of water brought to this designated shelter. Let's get some mattresses brought there. And then that way when the storm hits, you're already set up. You could tell people the night before, our shelters are ready to go. You could go ahead and move there so you're safe and out of these areas. But that all comes beforehand, and you got to start at the bottom. And that's just everybody coming together, describing how you're going to respond, letting everybody know who's responsible for what. You're responsible for the shelters, you're responsible for traffic, and having all that information put together beforehand so that when a disaster happens, you're already prepared for it. Now it's just taking that preparedness plan that you put together with all your subject matter experts and saying, this is exactly how we're going to respond.
So, listening to the last few minutes of dialogue, I said at the outset, it's kind of like looking in the mirror when I come to Trinidad and Tobago. And I mean that not to trivialize the nature of the human toll, the human impact of disaster, but it is complex. Who picks up the bill is a pertinent question, and under what circumstances, and it is something that we struggle with, is maybe a strong word, but something that we confront. That's why you have to have the accountant in the room, and sometimes you have to have lines of authority, and sometimes there's the IOU situation where you say, look, just get it done. It's a life and property issue. We'll figure out who pays after the fact. But that is a universal struggle. The almighty dollar, whether it's TTD or USD, kind of drives a lot of the conversation. The fact that there are templated and scalable universal tools that are readily available. There's the ICS program was brought up a couple of times. The fact that there are national frameworks in place, both in Trinidad and Tobago and in the U.S. The things are there. The will of the people is in this room right now. You have the stakeholders here gathered. There is again, something else we see at home. There is a wonderful initiative happening in location A, or there was a wonderful initiative happening in location B, and they lose steam and the communications bridge between the relevant stakeholders falls apart. So this is a beautiful opportunity, as we said at the outset, and I think Ray mentioned it, bringing everyone here together today. You're rebuilding those bridges. So that's, if there's any critical output, any critical result that comes from this initial dialogue, from all the stakeholders in this room, is that you're exchanging that information, figuring out the communication channel that works best for you, and then grow from there. So we're approaching lunch, and I wanted to touch on a couple of things. There was some question reference, what does the individual accountability look like? What is the personal responsibility? And I'll share with you just quickly, we talked about floodplains in the U.S. Texas had a lot of flooding this year, and there was a big discussion. Who pays my bill that my land is flooded? And then government, why did you build there? So again, there's a, to begin with, and then I didn't know it was a floodplain, and this goes back and forth. So I just highlight that to show you again that complexity between government and the individual responsibility across the spectrum of behavior and bill paying and construction techniques and governing guidance, it exists in both our houses. But speaking specifically to the citizen responsibility and where the individual citizen can participate with a better frame of reference, a better educated stance, and a better equipped position of response. There's something called the Citizen Corps. I want to bring Mr. Dalton back up to speak to what Citizen Corps looks like. So back to Mr. Dalton, just quickly to talk about the Citizen Corps.
Okay, we've had some good discussion here, and I'm between you and lunch. So we got a federal program called Citizen Corps, and it has a couple of functions. Basically, it's involving the community in emergency response. It has a volunteer component to it, making an emergency kit for you and your family, emergency preparedness. It's involvement with your community and training there. There are a couple different training modules for it. There's a medical services module. So it's a way for you it's a way we use to reach out to train volunteers to support secondary roles in emergencies. Next slide. Our public information section at DEMA. Earlier there was a question asked of what we do with that. We have some public outreach where we go out and we educate the public at public fairs. We have a state fair for the state. We also have community fairs where we go out. We do give out emergency kits. We show citizens how to make emergency kits and what should go in it, what radio stations to monitor for emergencies, those types of things. We have an emergency alert system under our public information officer. That's where we have broadcast interruptions, where to tune for more information, and so forth. And here's some of our information resources. We have a web page, and we have a Facebook page as well. And then there's a Prepared Delaware page. It actually shows you, gives you instructions on how to make an emergency kit. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take those. Thank you.
The last thing I say before I turn it back over is that we are all in this room for the same purpose. Okay, public service equates to public trust, which equates to public safety. So the preservation of life and property is paramount in our particular sets of calling in the public service environment, public service space. The fact that the conversation is passionate and heated is representative of the passion that's required to address the public and to help them resolve their needs, get them to satisfaction. So it's not easy. Every conflict, every disaster has some similar elements, but there'll be a curveball thrown in each and every one of them. Regardless if it's the same type of environmental deal. If it's a flood every year, not every flood is exactly the same. Disaster-prone areas, danger-prone areas are going to stay danger-prone areas until investment is made to remediate or repair. That is not necessarily, maybe in the public works sector and maybe at the ministerial levels, it's a requirements and funds-generated resolution. But that may not necessarily be the aim that we get to here. The planning on how to respond, to prepare and respond and be resilient is the focus. The sharing of information, the sharing of good information in a positive manner making sure that point A gets to point B, gets to point C without loss of resolution. Every disaster suffers from that particular shortfall. I mean, you know, the telephone game that we play as children, you know, person A to person Z, by the time it gets to person Z, it's an unintelligible, garbled mess. So that communication element is a primary focus, I think, that should continue to be looked at, and that's the same issue for us at home. But bottom line, public service equates to public trust and to public safety. So if we're centering our dialogue on that and then wrapping it in plans and programs and training exercises, then we've done good, I think.
Disaster. But at this point in time, what I would expect that comes out of this when everybody leaves and we pull back the team together, we write our own blueprint on disaster preparedness that is exclusive to the Miaro-Rio Claro region, our Miaro constituency, and then other people can piggyback from our country so that we could really be serious and really make something meaningful what has happened here today, which is a priceless moment in my view for getting these international people of great volume of intellectual capacity in disaster to come to our small region, Miaro-Rio Claro. Don't let us waste. Thank you very much.